All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everybody, this is Tom Salunke of DeviceTalks. Welcome back to the DeviceTalks Weekly podcast. It's T-minus a week and some days until DeviceTalks West. I hope you're planning to join us at the Santa Clara Convention Center on October 18th and 19th. It's going to be a great couple of days. Registration numbers are looking strong, but more is better. More is definitely better. We definitely would love to have every single one of you at DeviceTalks West. So please do go to west.devicetalks.com to register. One person who will be there is our guest today. His name is Nitin Salunke. He is the CEO of Supira Medical, and Supira is part of the ShifaMed program. ShifaMed, as a matter of fact, is sponsoring the day one networking reception on the night of DeviceTalks, the first day of DeviceTalks West. So that will be an excellent time to build your MedTech network and to get to meet some really great people. So please, if you're going to DeviceTalks West, make sure you set aside some time to spend the evening with us at the reception. It's going to be a great couple of hours within a great couple of days. So Nitin Salunke and I started talking a while ago, actually, around the time that Abiomed was acquired, and I'll reference that in the interview. He introduced me to Supira then, and it's a company that I've been tracking from afar. Asked Nitin to be on our interventional panel, which is happening on day 2 at DeviceTalks West. He'll be on the panel with folks from Supira Medical and Elixir Medical talking about the future of interventional care. So it's an area of interest, interventional care. I mean, obviously, as we see treatments move out of higher level clinical settings, interventional care is going to play a bigger role, and interventional tools are going to be more important. So Kayleen Brown will be leading that conversation, and it's going to be a great one. So you'll get a hint of that in the interview today. I talked with Nitin about his path into MedTech, about his past and his path into MedTech, and sort of how he positioned himself to be a startup CEO. And we'll also, of course, talk about Supira, about how its device, its pVAD device, is superior, or they hope it'll be superior to existing devices. So we'll get into that as well. So I'm very happy to have Nitin on the podcast today. It's a great story, great MedTech story. And once again, he'll be part of DeviceTalks West. I hope you'll be part of DeviceTalks West. I know I said that at the top, but we're really excited about this program and would definitely like to have you be there. And if you are attending, please do say hello. It's a very small space. I've run the video on LinkedIn. We toured the space, Kayleen and Brown, during our MedTech Nerd Tour. Showed you where the theater will be. We got the outside of the theater, but where the breakout rooms will be. It's going to be a fantastic spot for networking. So go to west.devicetalks.com. Use the code DTW25 to save 25% off the price of registration, so you can get in for just over $500 for 2 days of great instructions, great connections, great insights. I had a really busy week this week talking with the speakers. I had a chance to speak with Fred Khosravi, who was everything that I thought he'd be. Super nice, super motivated, great story for imperative care. I talked with Hani Abuhalka from Johnson & Johnson MedTech about their very unique approach to digital surgery and surgical robotics. We'll cover that also at DeviceTalks West. Go to my LinkedIn post from Friday. I'll reference all the people I spoke with, Daniel Hawkins, others, in prepping for this meeting. And the more with each conversation, I get more and more excited. So I can't stress this enough. It's going to be a great 2 days. I know there are a lot of MedTech conferences, but I really hope you'll take some time to join us. There's so many MedTech companies within a 20-minute drive of the Santa Clara Convention Center. I'm sure you can find the time to stop by and find the programs, find the conversations that mean the most to you. And of course, build some time to come to the networking reception. We'll have one the day before, but also the one that ShifaMed is hosting the night in between the 2 days. So much going on for the MedTech industry at DeviceTalks West. I really do hope you'll join us. Go to west.devicetalks.com. I will be taking off a couple of days next week. I'll be working some of those days, but very happy to say I'm going to go visit my son out at Purdue with my whole family. So we're looking forward to that. But we do have a great Device Talks Tuesdays coming up this Tuesday, and I'll be there for that. And it is brought to you by MTD Micromolding, and we'll talk about material behavior at the microscale. The title is Material Behavior at the Microscale, the Core of Medical Device Innovation. So it's an important topic. Go to DeviceTalks.com to register for that. You can watch that live at 4 p.m. Eastern on October 10th, or you can watch that on demand at your leisure. Other than that, let us just roll into the conversation I had with Nitin. There's just so much going on. I didn't have a chance to record any kind of session with Chris Newmarker, but we hope to get back in that rotation. If not next week, certainly after Device Talks West. Just a reminder, we'll also be at Device Talks West. The final discussion of the day will be another live Device Talks Weekly recording. So if you'd like to see one of these silly things recorded in person, that's another reason to go to Device Talks West. We'll do it right there on stage. We'll have myself, Chris Newmarker, Kayleen Brown, Joe Mullings of the Mullings Group, and I'm sure we'll find one or two other great experts as well to kind of just give us their sense of the 2 days, and maybe some comments as to where things are going in medtech. We did this in Boston. It was not only fun, but Joe Mullings had offered up thoughts about private equity, which are bearing out, and some other observations with bearing out. So if you want some insights on where things are headed, I highly recommend you sit in on that session, and we'll take questions from the audience too. So it should be a lot of fun, and we'll work to get that podcast out the very next day. So hopefully we'll have that little wrap-up session for you sent directly to your listening device if you are a subscriber to the Device Talks Podcast Network. Well, Nitin Salunke, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Tom. Glad to be here.
I'm very happy to have you on. I know we had connected several months ago. You had reached out after the Abiomed acquisition to introduce me to Supira, and it's a company I've been tracking for a long time. And it's great to have you on the podcast, and not only to tell your story here, but I know we're going to be telling your story, or you'll be on a panel at Device Talks West looking at new interventional technologies. So it's kind of a great opportunity to talk about you, to sort of preview some of the things you'll be sharing at Device Talks West. So thank you for being part of Device Talks West, by the way. So let's go into your story first, though. We always love to find out a little bit about our guests. What was it that drew you to the medical device industry?
Tom, it goes back to the graduate school. I was working on my PhD that time on the East Coast, and I was a mechanical engineering student at that time. I was always fascinated by machines and equipment. So that's how I end up into mechanical engineering. However, it's one of those things where you take a class under a faculty that's just out of curiosity. So I happened to take a class on biomechanics. And that time, the faculty, the professor who taught the class was just outstanding in teaching. But more so than that, he showed how much similarity exists between a traditional machine and a human being in terms of problem solving and application of engineering to deal with the disease states and disease process. So I just took that class out of curiosity, and that made me switch my research focus from traditional mechanical behavior of materials to cardiovascular biomechanics.
Interesting.
Yeah, he had a research grant to study those days. Angioplasty was available, however, very high recoiling rate, where you inflate a balloon, but balloon, as soon as you deflate, the vessel will collapse, sometimes as much as 30% of the patient. And that's very catastrophic, to have a vessel to collapse after angioplasty. So he had a research grant to study properties of the blood vessel. And that's how I got to switch the research topic from traditional material to vascular biomechanics. And subsequently finished the PhD, and rest is history.
Interesting. So looking back now, you've been in this industry for a good long time. Looking back to that lecture, did he deliver on the goods? Did he oversell sort of what was possible with technology via the functioning as a human body would? Was it as easy as maybe you thought it was? Watching that presentation was a lot more difficult. How do you look at that lesson now from where you are today?
No, he really gave a framework of, I call, cardiovascular mechanics. And since then, if you look at the journey, from angioplasty to bare metal stent to drug-eluting stent to atherectomy and more recently, Shockwave Medical. All of that fundamental that I was working on at that time, as my PhD thesis was, that a different stenosis or plaque formations in the human being have different composition. And depending on the composition of a plaque, you need to come up with possibly different mechanism to open that blood vessel. And I think that fundamental is still valid, and it really got validated by all of the therapies those got developed in the last 25 years.
That's fascinating. I certainly see the appeal of that lesson. As I've mentioned on this podcast multiple times, my son is going into mechanical engineering with an eye toward aerospace, but I hope he gets a class like that just opens his eyes to the opportunities in biomed.
Glad you said that, because that was exactly where I was heading.
Really?
Aerospace or automotive. Those are my two choices at that time, and that class offered such a unique and different perspective. And I've been lucky that almost last entire career of 25 plus years, I get to work on cardiovascular devices.
That's amazing. So what was your first job out of college?
So as I was finishing my my PhD, started reaching out to different cardiac and vascular companies, and along those search process, happened to contact WL Gore and Cordis and ACS Guidance those days. WL Gore happened to offer me that job out of school, and that's where the first job came in as R&D engineer, where I was there for 15 years.
Oh, so did the time at WL Gore, what was that? What was the culture like? What was the experience like? You were there for 15 years, so it obviously connected with you. But what were some of the lessons you learned from that time there?
Yeah, WL Gore at that time was a surgical vascular company, primarily surgical vascular graft company. And they wanted to go into other areas, and including cardiology, including cardiac surgery. And that's when they hired some of us fresh out of grad school as fresh PhDs with expertise in certain areas. So my expertise being in cardiology and cardiovascular mechanics. One of the first challenge they gave me is, hey, let's come up with a product for cardiology or cardiac patients using Gore's proprietary materials knowledge, as well as, of course, the EPTFE material. And so that's how it was very innovative times and culture. And I thought it was a good combination of academic and industry. It allowed us to come up with a blue sky idea type of project. At the same time, you don't have to work on a limited academic budget and prolonged timelines. That's the better part of working in the industry, to get that industry budget as well as some defined time period of the project and delivery. And that's where it all got started. Gore also has a unique culture in terms of people first. And so working with a group of talented engineers and convincing and sharing them your vision and having them join you as a project team member and building the team, and then using that team to deliver on the product. Those were some of the early days where the innovation was really in the fast track at WL Gore.
So from there, you went on to Cordis. Was that the transition? I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile right now.
So
how did that transpire?
Yeah, so I continue working at Gore, initially in a cardiology, pediatric cardiology product that was septal occluder, the first generation product, Helix septal occluder, that recently got replaced by CardioSeal as a second generation product. So I continued that journey from cardiology to endovascular, worked on the Prograft medical acquisition that WL Gore had. So that's what made me come from Arizona to the Bay Area to integrate that Prograft acquisition into Gore Medical, and then continued working on that acquisition. Had subsequently three more acquisitions. Those are integrated. Time came when either I have to look beyond the Bay Area of Gore's location or go back to Arizona at the headquarters. And it was a difficult choice. I was enjoying my ride with WL Gore. At the same time, I was looking forward to some change and some new challenge. And that was the time Tom Cordis J&J decided to relocate their business and R&D center from East Coast to the Bay Area. So as they were relocating from New Jersey to Bay Area, they were looking for some local leadership talent, and that's when I got recruited.
Interesting. We're obviously having DeviceTalks West at the Santa Clara Convention Center. I was having a conversation earlier today just about the engineering depth for medtech in the Bay Area and specifically in the Santa Clara space. How would you describe that depth to someone that you're talking to at a barbecue or someplace? What is the depth of engineering talent like out there?
I think that other than depth, I will say the specific skill sets, and other than that, the motivation to take on very challenging problems, not being fearful of failure. So not having that fear of failure and having a special skill set, that's a very powerful combination to go and tackle some of the problems. Those are difficult to tackle if you are not in the Bay Area ecosystem.
That's a great point. Yeah, no, it's true. You do need special skill sets to tackle a lot of the problems that medtech's facing. So how did you move from Cordis? I'm kind of looking, I saw you became ultimately vice president of research and development at Medtronic Neurovascular, but also you were for a time vice president of research and development at Altura Medical, which was acquired by Lombard Medical. So had you made a move to a startup company at that point?
Yeah, so startup was always in the game plan all
Okay.
along. What happened was, Tom, first of all, being in the Bay Area, you are surrounded by that startup spirit. Secondly, when I was at Gore for those 10 plus years in Silicon Valley, before that 5 years in Arizona, we had several acquisitions, and I happened to be playing a role in integrating those acquisitions.
Oh, neat.
So I get to see these startups from the other side of the fence, if you will, during my 15 year at Gore. And I was, as I was transitioning from Cordis was, by the way, that time got acquired by Cardinal Health.
Right.
And that acquisition gave us some of us the choices, either to go to Cardinal, go back to J&J, or find something outside both J&J and Cardinal Health. And so that's when I thought, it's a good opportunity for me to consider that startup option. And Altura Medical that time was developing AAA endograft, which was my expertise when I was at Gore. And the CEO of Altura that time happens to be ex-Gore associate. So I had that familiarity of the leadership, familiarity of the technology. And of course, it was at the early stages that I could join. So that's what the transition from Cordis to Altura was very, very seamless. And it is something that I was looking forward to make that transition from large company to a startup.
Interesting. So how did Medtronic come into play? Yeah, it sounds like an interesting time of your life.
Yeah, that was a difficult period in terms of fundraising when we were at Altura.
Yeah.
Not in general, but in the endovascular space. Endovascular space was getting a little bit saturated at that time. And bringing additional funds appears to be a little more challenging. So as we were doing that, simultaneously, we got an offer from Lombard, which was also in the endovascular space, to merge with them. And so that became the ultimate opportunity for Altura to merge with Lombard. And as those talks were happening, although it was a shorter tenure since the companies were merging, I also got a call from Covidien that time, which happens to be the EV3 business, where they had neurovascular and peripheral vascular business unit within EV3. Those were acquired by Covidien. So this was the neurovascular business of the EV3 that was under Covidien in Orange County. And that's when the call came in. It felt a natural progression of using my endovascular and cardiovascular background to work in a neurovascular stroke space. And also it gave me an opportunity to go back and practice those skills again in a larger company with a very rapidly evolving portfolio. So, sometimes things happen, Tom, where you are not planning for those, but you just get that call and you feel like that's the right call to take and right opportunity to explore. That's how the transition happened to Covidien. And within, I think, 6 months or so, the Covidien Medtronic acquisition announcement came out. In fact, I think the announcement was, there was some background noise going on as I was interviewing at Covidien. And I said, this is good for Covidien. And I took a chance saying that if acquisition happens and integration happens, and if I still get to keep my role, that's good journey with Medtronic. And that's exactly happened. In fact, beyond my imagination, not only Medtronic took that neurovascular business, they made it a standalone business unit and really infused a lot of capital as well as priority within Medtronic businesses. And it was a great ride there with a double-digit growth year after year. Those were the days the stroke therapies were emerging rapidly and clinical evidence was getting generated and new technologies were getting repurposed to treat stroke, both ischemic and hemorrhagic patients.
That's great. So you had earlier expressed that you had the startup bug, that you were interested in being part of a startup, and you were with Altura, and I wonder at that point what felt right about the Covidien EV3 future Medtronic opportunity that led you back into the big companies? And was there a tug of war internally between you that you were really kind of ready to hit the startup world with full force? Was there any resistance to going back to a big company? And how did you ultimately make that decision?
Yeah, so Medtronic, the 5-year career was really a cornerstone. Those were the times I started thinking about moving from a functional role, from R&D type roles, to more into general management. And with a great coaching and mentorship and training opportunities that Medtronic offered, I was getting exposed to the general management type skill set requirement and get to develop those by learning from my colleagues. As it goes with talent development and growth, I was getting developed for those type of roles within Medtronic. And one day again, a call came in from the Shifamed incubator saying that, hey, they are looking for a CEO to lead one of their portfolio companies. And so it was one of those things where I was looking to make a transition from a large company to small company, but also from a functional leadership role to a more of a general management role. So couldn't be a better time and couldn't be a right opportunity. And that's where, again, you take the call, you go and explore, and it just feels like the right transition to do. And that's what happened with Medtronic to Supira Medical transition.
So I usually ask, if folks leaving a larger company to be CEO of a smaller company, if there was some turmoil or conflict or what made them choose the path that they're going to take. But just from hearing this whole conversation, it seemed like it was a pretty clear choice for you that this is definitely what you wanted to do next.
Yes.
That's great. So I want to talk about Supira in a moment, but we're going to be talking a lot about at DeviceTalks West about engineers sort of in the opportunities they have outside of the engineering track to become leaders like you, to become leaders at larger businesses. How does one transition, or how did you find the transition from being primarily an engineer involved with R&D to being someone who has a broader, more holistic responsibilities? Was it easy? And did the skill sets you have as an engineer, did they transition to what you need to be as a CEO, or did you need to find some training? You obviously needed to find some training from other sources as well, but what was that transition like?
Yeah, I think to make that transition, I think you have to prepare for it, right? It should not be abrupt. It should not be sudden. It should not definitely be without giving serious thinking. And so I start with talking about the mindset as an engineer. When I was finishing my graduate school, of course, you get trained to do research and trained to do innovative problem solving as a PhD student. And so that time I had a choice of going more on the front end innovation or into product development. And I intentionally chose going into product development route because my mindset was, hey, if I am going to do any technical work, I need to create a value. I need to create financial value. I need to create a value in the eyes of our physicians and patients. So I chose to more focus on developing a product by taking a concept or idea and repeating that multiple times, than coming up with a brand new therapy or brand new idea or brand new concept. And through that product development process, I trained myself that, look, every function, every department has to be a profit center. In other words, if you're working for a large company in a given department, you have your budget. The company is giving you a certain dollar amount, and your job is to return more than they invested, right, in that department. Otherwise, at the end of the day, there is no value proposition from your department. So that's how my mindset was, as an individual contributor, then I became a team leader, then became a functional leader, that how do I return more on that dollar invested in the department? And with that kind of mindset, I realized that to deliver the value of a cross-functional collaboration, you need not just R&D, but you need quality, you need clinical, you need regulatory, you need operations, you need commercial, sales, marketing to make that new product successful. And so that was my mindset all along. To work on a new product, you have to deliver it first clinically successfully and then commercially successfully. So with that mindset, that's how I was growing up, through my roles in engineering or technical roles. However, my approach was always more financially driven. And so it became a natural transition when I was ready to make that functional transition from head of the function to a general management. So a little bit long answer there, Tom, but other than, doing the obvious thing of gaining the skills, getting the mentorship, I think it's a mindset also. Are you going to look at that product from all different functions and angles, or are you going to be only looking at it from your individual department?
Well, let's talk about Supira Medical now. Before we get into sort of the company itself and what drew you to it, I think people would love to understand what Supira is working toward and what you're developing.
Yeah, Tom, at Supira Medical, we are developing a percutaneous ventricular assist device, also called pVAD. It's basically a ventricular assist device that can be delivered via catheter. It usually gets used temporarily, anywhere from few hours to few days. So other than the LVAD, which are the permanent surgically implanted ventricular assist device, this device gets delivered via catheter, similar to interventional devices. And the technology is really applicable for two different type of patient population. One for the high-risk PCI or high-risk percutaneous coronary intervention patients, and other one is for cardiogenic shock. So what happens is during the PCI procedure, some patients may not be healthy enough or have comorbidities where they may be at a higher risk to go through angioplasty and stent procedure. In those patients, the physician can deploy our pump and support the cardiac pumping action while performing the angioplasty or stent. So that's the first indication that we are going after as a priority. We are also working on a cardiogenic shock patient. These are the heart failure patients who may not be able to sustain their cardiac pumping function for a prolonged period. So these are the patients, they can use our pump as they wait for the LVAD transplant or natural transplant. So that's a cardiogenic shock indication as a second application we are also exploring.
How is this delivered? Where would the opening be? And is it through the, I imagine through the groin, traditional way? Or?
Yeah, it's very similar to traditional interventional procedure where we place the introducer sheath in the groin and the pump gets delivered via catheter over a rapid exchange guide wire fashion to the abdominal thoracic aorta into the aortic valve sitting inside the ventricle. So similar delivery system or pathway as a traditional interventional procedure from femoral to abdominal to thoracic aorta into the ventricle.
So what is the profile like of this device? Obviously, I've seen LVADs, pictures of LVADs. They're not something that could be delivered that way. they're a bit too big.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked about that because that's one of our value proposition. Our value proposition at Supira is that we are developing a lower profile pVAD that can also generate higher flow. So the delivery profile that we have currently is 10 French. So we place a 10 French introducer sheath through which we deliver this pump and position it across the aortic valve in the ventricle.
So help me understand then, where does this sort of fit into the treatment process? This is not a replacement for an LVAD that might last a longer period of time. This is for a shorter window?
That's correct. So this device, our Supira Medical product, will bridge the gap between the patients when they became or start becoming the LVAD candidate, but they are not quite acquired the LVAD. So we come in and we offer the ventricular support during the procedure and or after the procedure so that the patient may not need the LVAD transplant subsequently.
So what would, and I'm learning about this space, what would allow for someone not to require the LVAD space? Does your pVAD provide just the support enough to allow the heart to recover itself or recover on its own?
That's right. You said it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our, as you know, heart is a muscle. So anytime any muscle gets time to relax or rejuvenate, that time is precious. And our pump, by taking over ventricular pumping action, allows the ventricle to relax and recover. And in those patients, when the ventricle recovers, those patients may not then need to be the LVAD candidate.
Interesting. So where does this fit into other products currently available? I mean, I mentioned Abiomed at the top. I mean, obviously it was a high profile acquisition. Everyone knows about the Impella. I mean, is this something that works along those lines?
Yes. So, as you talked about Abiomed and Impella, Impella is the product family. They have a lower profile pump and
Yep.
they have a higher profile pump. But what happens is physicians have to choose between lower profile and a higher flow. Because the lower profile pump gives a lower flow, higher profile pumps give a higher flow. Our unique offering is to offer a higher flow with a lower profile,
I see.
i.e., physicians don't have to compromise between profile and the flow.
So what is the significance of higher flow?
Yeah, so Tom, what happens is as the ventricle is pumping the blood, the higher the flow pump provides, the better the support patient gets and relax the ventricle. So higher flow allows physician to not worry about any ventricular compromise the patient may be going through while performing the angioplasty or a stent procedure.
I see.
The increasing flow or higher flow gives that much more mechanical circulatory support to the patient, i.e., keeping the patient safe throughout these high-risk PCI procedures.
I see. So where are you currently in your clinical trials and development?
Yeah, we had our 1-year anniversary, Tom, a couple of weeks ago, where we did our first in-human study in South America. So we are a clinical stage company, and for the past 12 months, we continue to treat more and more patients, like generating that clinical evidence. We also initiated our dialogues with US FDA so that we can start our clinical studies in the US very soon.
Interesting. So I guess going back to the conversation about startups, what is the experience been like leading this company? And you led it during, obviously you joined February 2020, the world changed in March 2020. What is that experience like? I don't want to get too deep into COVID talk, but overall, what has the experience been like of being a startup CEO?
No, it's as you said it, it was very interesting time being a first time CEO, that too during COVID time, and that too coming to a startup, it fit my personality. I usually like to go in an area where no one has been there before and try to create a new path. And so COVID just happened at the right time where coming in as a CEO, I get to practice all my leadership skills, both on the people side and technical side, and navigate through the COVID lockdown situation. That being said, we also are part of the ShifaMed incubator here. So Supira Medical is a portfolio company, and we have a very unique setup here where we have a functional support in certain supported functions, I should say, coming from ShifaMed. So when it comes to finance, human resources, facilities, IT, those we get from ShifaMed, and I get to focus more on core function at the company level, such as R&D, quality, regulatory, manufacturing, clinical. And so by having that kind of ShifaMed level oversight and having that kind of in-house mentorship allowed me to not only make that transition from a large company to a small company CEO role, it also gave me that much of a comfort and a cushion to take some risks, to do things in a very unique way, which were needed during the COVID transition time.
Interesting. So I see you closed on the $35 million Series B financing around the same time you joined. So must be nice to join a company with a little money in the bank.
Of course, that I cannot take credit for that.
Yes,
round was raised, but that gave me the financial runway and really take the product from early stages of development to advanced stages of development.
Yep.
And subsequently, get to raise the Series C based on the progress we made from Series B. That round happened on my terms, and that round gave us the runway to go to first in human and beyond.
Interesting. And what was that experience like of raising those funds?
No, it was very, very educational, of course. Get to learn the value proposition that the investors think about the company. It allows also to think me about where and how to prioritize certain things that creates the value for the company, because the investors will invest in you if you show that your company continues to create more value. And so that was a different way of looking at the financial framework than I used to look at when I was with the larger company, where your stakeholders are different and your value creation opportunity or proposition is different in a larger company. So it was a very much a learning experience. And based on that learning, prioritizing company value creation and investors' interest as well as physicians' interest and balancing those two, that became additional skill sets that I get to gain.
Interesting. So what does the path forward look like for Supira? What would you like to accomplish next? And what ultimately does a win look like for you?
Of course, our path towards commercialization in the US, right? So we initiated our dialogues with US FDA, planning to make that, this being a class 3 device and a PMA process. So first step towards that is IDE and going through the early feasibility study. So we initiated our discussions with FDA, very encouraging response from FDA so far, and going to work with them to get IDE approval and initiating those early feasibility study evaluation next year. And then subsequently to that, a pivotal study and then the PMA approval. So walking the journey of IDE studies, clinical trial, and then the PMA approval for commercialization.
Interesting. And final question, you referenced ShifaMed earlier. Can you give us a little overview on ShifaMed and how it works and how it generates ideas?
Yeah, so ShifaMed is an innovation hub here in Silicon Valley. Typically, we work within cardiovascular and ophthalmic space. ShifaMed portfolio companies typically come up with a product concept at earlier stages, which has market potential in an existing therapy space. By coming up with that product concept and idea, we typically use our capital to de-risk the technical aspect of that concept and then subsequently clinical aspect, i.e. taking that concept to first in human, and then that way creating the clinical validation. And once we create that clinical validation and enough confidence, we generate interest in the strategics for acquisition potential. And once we go through the clinical validation phase, that's when we initiate our dialogues with the strategics to consider synergy with them and utilize their clinical regulatory pathway and commercialization to commercialize the technology. So we, in that way, become the external R&D engine for the larger companies.
Great. Well, it's great to finally get Supira's story on the podcast, and it's going to be wonderful to have you as part of DeviceTalks West coming up. So, Nitin, I really appreciate you joining us on the podcast.
Likewise, looking forward to DeviceTalks.
All right, well, that is a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us in this episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly podcast. Once again, please join us at DeviceTalks West. It's happening on October 18th and 19th. If you want to get a sense of all that's going on, I'll be posting like a fiend on LinkedIn this week. So connect with me on LinkedIn. Tom Salemi, connect with Kayleen Brown on LinkedIn, and she'll be posting as well. Chris Newmarker as well. In fact, the whole editorial team will be sending out reminders as to what will be happening at DeviceTalks West, October 18th and 19th at the Santa Clara Convention Center. So you can't miss that. But if you just want to go get it directly in one shot, go to west.devicetalks.com and check out the agenda and the speaker list. Again, it's going to be a great 2 days. I really hope you're part of it. And if you are there, stop me and say hello. I'd love to hear your story as well. Let's see. Subscribe to the DeviceTalks Podcast Network so you can get all of our great podcasts, including DeviceTalks Weekly, Intuitive Talks, Stryker Talks, Boston Scientific Talks. We just put one out this week, and Abbott Talks. And we are working on more talks, so stay tuned. So don't miss one. Go to Apple or Amazon, whatever podcast player you use, and subscribe to the DeviceTalks Podcast Network. Other than that, Device Talks Tuesdays on Tuesday, brought to you by MTD Micromolding. And that's a lot. But I really do hope I'll see you at Device Talks West. Have a great weekend and a great week, everybody. And you'll be hearing from me, and we'll be back next Friday with our final pre-conference Device Talks Weekly podcast. Thanks, everybody.